Tonight, on a clear night, the sky over your head looks full. Thousands of stars, the bright band of our own galaxy, a darkness that feels like the rare exception between all that light. But that fullness is not a fact about the universe. It is a fact about your address. The universe is, by volume, somewhere between 80 and 90% empty, and the bright, crowded sky you grew up under is one of the rare lit pockets in an ocean of nothing. There is a single place we have mapped where that nothing reaches almost all the way to perfect. It is called the Boötes Void, a whole 330 million light-years across, where 2,000 galaxies should sit and only about 60 do, stand at its centre, and the rest of the universe would be too far away to see. A civilization born there would look up at an empty sky and conclude, reasonably, that it was utterly alone. And the strangest part is that one day, the whole universe will look exactly like that. Get comfortable, hit subscribe if you're new here, because by the end of tonight, the empty dark between the stars will mean something it never meant before. Now, let's slowly ease into this. Part 1. The Sky You Were Given. Go outside tonight, far enough from the city that the stars come back, and look up for a while. Let your eyes adjust. After a few minutes, the sky stops being a scattering of bright points and becomes something thicker, something almost crowded. The longer you look, the more stars arrive, until the darkness between them seems like the exception and the light seems like the rule. On a good night, away from every lamp and screen, you can see a faint band of milk spilled across the whole sky, and that band is our own galaxy seen edge-on, a wheel of a few 100 billion stars that we live inside. It feels generous up there. It feels full, and without ever deciding to, you carry that feeling home with you, and you let it stand in for the whole universe. You assume, quietly, that everywhere is like this, that wherever you went, however far, the sky would keep you company. I want to gently take that assumption apart tonight, because it is wrong, and the way it is wrong is one of the strangest and most beautiful facts we have ever learned about the place we live. The crowded, companionable sky you grew up under is not a fair sample of the universe. It is a local accident. It is what the sky looks like from here, from inside a galaxy, near other galaxies, in one of the brighter neighbourhoods the cosmos has to offer. Move yourself somewhere else, somewhere the universe has plenty of and the sky empties out. The stars thin, the galaxies recede, and in at least one place that we know of, a place we are going to walk into slowly tonight, the sky empties so completely that a person standing there would have every reason to believe their own galaxy was the only thing that had ever existed. That place has a name, though the name is a little playful for what it is. People call it the Great Nothing. More formally, it is the Boötes Void, a hole in the universe roughly 330 million light-years across, sitting about 700 million light-years away from where you are right now. Those numbers will mean very little to you at this moment, and that is fine. By the end of tonight, they will mean more than you might want them to. For now, hold on to just one idea, the idea we are going to build everything else on top of. The sky you were given is not the sky the universe mostly has. You were handed a rare and crowded view, and you mistook it for the ordinary one. Here is the thing about a mistake like that. It is not your fault, and it is not even really a mistake of yours. Every creature that has ever looked up from the surface of any world inside any galaxy has made the same one, because from the inside of a lit-up place you cannot see how lit up your place is. A fish does not know it is wet. We do not know we are bright. We had to invent telescopes, and then we had to spend most of a century pointing them outward and counting what we found, before we could begin to understand that the light we are surrounded by is the special case, and the darkness is the general one. The universe is mostly nothing. We just happen to live in one of the somethings. So tonight is going to be a slow walk away from the somethings and into the largest piece of nothing we have ever mapped. We are going to start where you are, under your crowded sky, and we are going to move outward, and the sky is going to thin, and we are going to keep going past the point where it thins until we reach a place where the thinning becomes almost total. And then, instead of standing outside that emptiness and pointing at it the way you would point at a thing in a museum, we are going to step inside it. We are going to stand at its centre and look up and see what there is to see, which is very nearly nothing at all. That is the part I most want you to feel tonight, because it is the part that changes how you understand the sky you came in with. Think for a moment about how your sense of a full sky was even built. You did not arrive in the world knowing what space looks like. You learned it slowly, from the only window you have ever had, which is the small patch of sky visible from the surface of one planet, circling one ordinary star tucked into one arm of one galaxy. Everything you believe about what is normal out there was assembled from that single vantage point. The way a person raised in one valley might assume all the world is valleys. We are valley dwellers in a sense, and our valley happens to be unusually green. The stars overhead, the band of the galaxy, the faint companions hanging at the edge of sight, all of it taught us that the universe is a place that keeps you company. And we believed the lesson because it was the only lesson on offer, and because nothing in our daily experience ever contradicted it. But a single window is a dangerous teacher. It shows you what is in front of it and hides everything that is not, and it never tells you which is which. For thousands of years our window taught us that the Earth was the centre of everything, because from here that is exactly how it looks. It taught us that the sun was small and the stars were tiny, because from here that is how they appear. Each of those lessons felt like plain common sense, and each one turned out to be a trick of position, a story the window told that the universe did not actually agree with. The fullness of the sky is the same kind of lesson. It feels like a fact about the universe. It is really a fact about our address. And tonight we're going to do the one thing the window can never do on its own. We're going to imagine standing somewhere else, somewhere the universe has far more of than it has of places like ours, and we're going to find out what the sky teaches there. The reason this matters, the reason it is more than a curiosity, is that almost everything you feel about your own size and significance is downstream of that crowded sky. When people look up and feel small, they are still feeling small inside a crowd surrounded by light, held in a kind of cosmic company. That feeling, humbling as it is a luxury. It depends on there being something up there to feel small in front of. Take the crowd away, take the light away, leave only the smooth and total dark, and the feeling changes into something we do not really have a word for, something older and quieter than wonder and closer to solitude. That is the feeling waiting at the centre of the place we are walking toward. And to reach it honestly, we cannot start with the void. We have to start with the structure that the void is a hole in, the great architecture of light and dark that we only learn to see in the last handful of human lifetimes. Before we set out, let me say a word about why a place this empty is worth 2 hours of your night, because on the face of it, emptiness sounds like the least promising subject imaginable. We are drawn, naturally, to the full and the dramatic, to colliding galaxies and exploding stars and the bright, violent machinery of the cosmos. A region where nothing happens, where almost nothing is, seems like the part of the tour you would skip. But I have come to think that the emptiest place in the universe has more to teach us about our situation than almost any of the bright spectacles, precisely because it strips away everything familiar and leaves us alone with the bare fact of the universe's structure and our place within it. The void is a kind of test. It asks what is left of our sense of the cosmos and of ourselves when you take away all the light. And the answer, as we will find, is more than you might expect and stranger, and in the end more comforting than the question makes it sound. I will tell you now, so there is no suspense about it, that nothing in this story is frightening in the way the word terrifying might make you expect. There is no monster in the void, nothing got eaten, no catastrophe carved it out. The terror of the emptiest place in the universe, if you want to call it terror, is a quiet one, the kind that arrives slowly and stays with you, the kind that has more to do with scale and time and loneliness than with any danger. It is the terror of looking at something so large and so empty that your mind, which evolved to judge the size of predators and rivers and the distance to the next tree, simply cannot hold it. And it is the terror, gentler still and somehow heavier, of realizing that this emptiness is not a freak. It is a preview. So settle in and let the crowded sky fade for a while, because we are about to find out what is really out there between the lights. Part 2. The Foam Between the Stars. For a long time, even after we knew there were other galaxies, we pictured them the wrong way. We imagined the universe as a kind of evenly salted soup, galaxies sprinkled more or less at random through space, here one, there another, with roughly the same number wherever you looked. It was a reasonable guess. From our single vantage point with limited tools, the galaxies did seem scattered without much pattern. But a guess is only as good as the map you can draw to test it, and for most of the 20th century we could not draw the map, because we did not know how far away any individual galaxy was. We could see them on the flat dome of the sky, but we could not place them in depth. It is the difference between seeing lights through a fogged window at night and actually knowing which ones are nearby porches and which are distant towns. Without depth, there is no structure, there is just a smear. Then, slowly, we learned to measure depth, and the smear resolved into something no one had quite expected. The galaxies were not scattered evenly at all. They were arranged. They clung together in long glowing threads called filaments, some of them hundreds of millions of light years long, like luminous rope thrown across the darkness. Where the threads crossed, galaxies piled up into dense knots, the great clusters and superclusters, the brightest and most crowded places in all of creation. And the threads themselves wrapped around something. They formed the edges and the surfaces of enormous, nearly empty bubbles, regions where almost no galaxies lived at all. Picture the suds in a sink full of dishwater, the way the soap films stretch between the air pockets, the way the water collects along the seams where bubbles meet. That is the shape of the universe on the larger scales. Astronomers call it the cosmic web, and it is one of the most important pictures we have ever drawn of reality. Now here is the part that should tilt the floor a little under you. In that picture, the bright places, the filaments, and the clusters and the galaxies take up almost none of the room. The bubbles take up almost all of it. By volume, the empty regions, the voids, make up something like 80 to 90% of the universe. The galaxies, the stars, the planets, everything that has ever glowed or lived or been warm is crammed into the thin films and threads that wrap around the emptiness, and the emptiness is the overwhelming majority of what there is. If you picked a random point in the universe, not a point near Earth, not a point anyone chose for a reason, just a genuinely random location in all of space, you would almost certainly find yourself not in a galaxy, not near a galaxy, but adrift in one of these enormous quiet bubbles with the nearest bright thing tens of millions of light years away. I want to say that plainly, because it is the sentence the rest of tonight depends on. Emptiness is not the exception in the universe. Emptiness is the rule. The crowding you see when you look up is the rare condition, the special pocket, the lucky address. The default state of space, the thing the universe is mostly made of, is a profound and patient nothing. We do not feel this because we cannot live in the nothing. Nobody and nothing forms out there in the middle of a void, or almost nobody, almost nothing, and so every observer who has ever existed has existed inside one of the rare bright pockets and has looked out and concluded, reasonably and incorrectly, that the universe is a place full of light. The cosmic web is the universe's true portrait, and in that portrait we're a fleck of paint on one of the threads, surrounded on every side by the dark majority. It is worth pausing to feel how recent this knowledge is, because it changes how you hold it. For the entire span of human history, every culture that ever looked up, every astronomer who ever charted the stars, every poet who ever wrote about the night, did all of it without knowing the single most basic fact about the shape of the universe, which is that it is mostly empty and arranged like foam. The cosmic web is not ancient wisdom. It is not something the old observatories knew. It is a discovery of the last few decades, pieced together from surveys that measured the distances to hundreds of thousands and then millions of galaxies, one painstaking measurement at a time, until the three-dimensional shape of space finally emerged from the data. People alive today were already adults when this picture came into focus. Your grandparents lived most of their lives not knowing it. We are among the very first humans to understand the structure we are embedded in, and the Boötes Void was one of the early clues that forced the picture into being. And the picture is genuinely difficult to hold in the mind, because it inverts everything our instincts tell us about what is solid and what is empty. We think of matter as the real thing and space as the nothing in between, the way we think of objects in a room as real, and the air as merely the gap. But on the larger scales, the proportions flip. The matter, all of it, every galaxy and star and world is the thin tracery, the delicate film stretched across the surfaces of the bubbles. The emptiness is the substance. The emptiness is what there is the most of by far, by an overwhelming margin. If you could somehow shrink the whole observable universe down to the size of a room and walk through it, you would spend almost all of your walk in darkness, crossing one enormous empty chamber after another, and only now and then would you brush past a glowing thread or a bright knot where the galaxies cling, The lit parts would be the exception you walked between. The dark would be the room itself. This is why the voids deserve our attention, and not as an afterthought. A void is not a flaw in the cosmic web, not a place where something is missing. A void is the main event. It is what the universe is built out of, the dominant component of reality by volume, the default condition of space. The filaments and clusters that we find so beautiful, the bright places where everything we care about happens to live, are really just the boundaries between voids, the leftover walls where the bubbles press against one another. To understand the universe at the larger scale is, more than anything, to understand its emptiness, and the Boötes Void gives us the clearest, largest, most unforgettable example of that emptiness within reach of our telescopes. So when we ask what it is like inside the void, we are not asking an idle question about one strange region. We're asking what it is like inside the most common kind of place there is. There is one more thing about the cosmic web that makes the voids even harder to dismiss as background, and it is the matter of scale relationships. The walls and filaments that wrap around the voids are not solid barriers. They are themselves mostly empty, just less empty than the voids they enclose. A filament is a region where galaxies are merely a little more common than average, a faint thickening in the foam, and even there the distances between galaxies are enormous. So when we say the universe is structured into bright walls around dark cells, we should not imagine the walls as anything like a surface you could stand on. We should imagine them as the slightly less empty seams in an ocean of emptiness, places where the rare galaxies cluster a bit more closely while still being separated by gulfs that would take light millions of years to cross. The contrast that defines the cosmic web is not full versus empty. It is empty versus emptier, and the voids are simply where the emptiness reaches its purest expression. This is why the discovery of a single enormous void was so important for cosmology as a whole. It was not just one strange region added to the catalogue. It was a measurement of how strong the contrast in the cosmic web could get, how far the sorting of matter into walls and voids had actually progressed. A void as empty as Boötes told astronomers that the universe had organised itself far more dramatically than the smooth models had assumed, that the difference between the thick places and the thin places was larger and sharper than anyone had expected. Every void we map is a data point about the strength of the forces that built the web, about how aggressively gravity has gathered matter into the bright seams and drained it from the dark cells. The voids are not the leftover gaps in the real structure. The voids are the structure, read from the side of absence rather than the side of presence, and they carry just as much information as the glowing filaments do. Once you understand that, the question of what it is like inside the largest of them stops being idle curiosity and becomes one of the most natural questions you could possibly ask about the universe. Once you see the web, a question starts to form on its own, and it is the question that this whole video is really about. If the voids are so common, and if some of them are so large, then what is it actually like inside one of them? Not the small ordinary voids, the ones that are merely empty. What about the biggest one we know? The one so large and so vacant that it earned a nickname and a reputation? What would you see, what would you not see, if you were somehow set down in the middle of the emptiest mapped place in existence and told to look around? We are getting close to that question now. But to ask it honestly, we first have to go back to the moment when human beings first realised that a place like that was even there, the moment the map went blank, and a few astronomers sat staring at a hole in the universe that they could not, at first, believe was real. Part 3. The night the map went blank. The year was 1981, and a small group of astronomers was doing something that does not sound dramatic at all. They were counting galaxies. More precisely, they were measuring the redshifts of galaxies in one particular patch of the northern sky, in the direction of the constellation Boötes, the herdsman, the figure ancient sky watchers imagined driving the bears around the pole. The team was led by an astronomer named Robert Kirshner, working with 3 colleagues, Augustus Umler, Paul Schechter, and Stephen Schechtman. Their goal was ordinary and important at the same time. They wanted to map how galaxies were distributed in depth across that region, to add another piece to the slowly assembling picture of a large-scale structure. It was careful, patient work, the kind that fills a career without ever making the news. To understand what they found, you have to understand the single tool that makes this kind of mapping possible, and it is worth slowing down for, because it is quietly one of the most powerful ideas in all of science. When light leaves a distant galaxy and travels toward us, it crosses an expanding universe, and as space itself stretches during the journey, the light stretches with it. Stretched light shifts toward the red end of the spectrum, and the farther away a galaxy is, the longer its light has travelled, the more space has expanded beneath it, and the more its light is shifted. So the amount of redshift in a galaxy's light is a ruler. Measure the shift, and you have measured the distance. This is how you turn the flat sky, where everything looks pasted onto the same dome, into a three-dimensional map where near things are near and far things are far. Galaxy by galaxy, redshift by redshift, you build up the real shape of space. So the team measured and plotted and watched their slice of the universe fill in. Near galaxies appeared, then farther ones, then farther still, the dots accumulating in the patterns everyone was starting to recognize, the clumps and the threads. And then something happened that was not supposed to happen. The dots stopped. Across an enormous range of distance, in the middle of their carefully surveyed region, there were almost no galaxies at all. Not a thinning, not a quiet patch. A near-total absence, hundreds of millions of light-years from front to back, a hole in the data so large that at first, the natural assumption was that something had gone wrong. An instrument problem, a gap in coverage, a mistake in the counting. Because the universe was not supposed to do this. Nothing in the prevailing picture prepared anyone for an empty region that big. Sit in that moment with the people who were there. Imagine the long table, the printed sheets, the slow accumulation of measured distances written out by hand. You add a galaxy to the map, and another, and the near space fills the way you expect. Then you cross into a certain range of distance and your pen has nothing to write. You check the next field, expecting the count to recover, and it does not. You check the one after that. Still almost nothing. The blank space on your page is not a margin or an error bar. It is a region of the actual universe, larger than anything in your catalogues, in which the galaxies that should be there are simply not. You feel, first, the small cold worry that you have broken something, that the fault is in your method, and then, as the checks come back clean and the absence holds, that worry turns into something stranger and much larger. The slow understanding that you're not looking at a flaw in the map. You're looking at a flaw in your idea of the universe, and the universe is winning. The galaxies are not missing from your data. They are missing from existence, right there, in a piece of sky you could cover with your thumb. What makes the discovery so arresting, looking back, is how completely it ran against the grain of what everyone expected. The reigning assumption in cosmology, the comfortable default, was that the universe should look smooth if you only zoomed out far enough. Nearby you might find clumps and clusters, local lumpiness, but average over a large enough region, and those bumps should wash out into a uniform, featureless sea of galaxies. This idea even had a dignified name, the cosmological principle, the assumption that the universe looks essentially the same everywhere on large scales, with no special places and no enormous features. A great deal of theory rested on that assumption, and then a region turned up that was hundreds of millions of light-years across and almost entirely empty, a feature so large it had no business existing. If the smoothness assumption were true, the void did not just surprise people, it challenged a foundation. That is part of why it took real courage to believe the result, and part of why the careful, repeated checking mattered so much. When your data show something that the prevailing theory says should not be there, the first and most responsible reaction is to suspect your data. Maybe the survey had missed galaxies that were faint or oddly placed. Maybe the way the targets were selected had quietly skipped over the region. The team and others went back and looked harder, with more sensitivity, hunting for the galaxies that ought to fill the gap, and what they found over the following years was that the gap was mostly real. A small number of galaxies did turn up inside it, the 60 or so we now know about, but the overwhelming emptiness held. The universe really had built a hole this large. The discomfort the discovery caused was not a sign that something had gone wrong. It was the ordinary feeling of a picture of reality being forced to grow. I dwell on this because it is a small lesson in how we come to know anything true about the universe at all. We do not simply look and see. We look, and we get a result that unsettles us, and we doubt it, and we check it, and we argue, and slowly, if the result is real, it survives the doubting and becomes part of the accepted shape of things. The Boötes Void had to earn its place in our picture of the cosmos by surviving exactly that process. It is not a rumour or a guess. It is a hard-won fact, confirmed and reconfirmed, that the universe contains an emptiness this large not far from us, in cosmic terms, in a direction you could point to on any clear spring night. And once that fact was secure, the natural next question was the one no survey could answer with numbers alone. The next question was what it would actually be like to be there. But before we can stand inside it, we have to take its true measure, and that means facing numbers that are built to defeat us. It is worth remembering, too, that the people who found the void were not looking for it, and that this is how a great many of the most important discoveries in science actually happen. Nobody set out to find the largest emptiness in the universe. The team was doing careful, methodical work on an unrelated question, building a map for its own sake, and the void simply appeared in the data, unwanted and unmistakable, refusing to go away. There is a lesson in that about the value of looking carefully at the universe even when you do not know what you're looking for, about how the cosmos keeps its biggest surprises in plain sight, waiting for someone patient enough to measure. The Boötes Void had been there for billions of years, hanging in the spring sky above every human who ever lived, and it took until 1981 for anyone to notice it. Not because it was hidden, but because no one had ever measured that patch of sky in enough depth to see the shape of the nothing. The discovery was not a matter of building a better telescope. It was a matter of finally paying close enough attention. It took time and more data, and the work of other astronomers to confirm that the hole was real, but it held up, and it kept its name, the Boötes Void. One of the first unmistakable signs that the universe builds emptiness on a scale nobody had imagined, and that the smooth, evenly salted soup was a fantasy. The real universe was foam, and here was one of its bubbles caught in the act of being almost perfectly empty. What the team had stumbled into was not a gap in the map. It was the largest single feature anyone had ever charted, and its main quality, its defining property, was that it contained almost nothing. Now the obvious question, the one you're probably already asking, is just how big almost nothing can be. So let us take the numbers the survey eventually gave us, and let us try carefully and without flinching to feel them. Part 4. The size of nothing. Let us start with the number that gets quoted most, and let us say it slowly. The Boötes Void is about 330 million light-years across. I'm going to ask you to not let that slide past you the way numbers usually do. We hear a phrase like 330 million light-years, and our minds file it under simply enormous and move on, because the mind has a ceiling, and once a quantity goes past that ceiling, every larger quantity feels about the same. But I want to walk you up to this one rung by rung, because the whole point of tonight is to stand at the exact place where your sense of scale gives out, and you cannot find that place if you let the numbers stay abstract. A light-year is the distance light travels in 1 year, and light is not slow. Light could go around the entire Earth about 7.5 times in a single second. At that speed, in 1 second, light has crossed a distance you could never walk in many lifetimes. Now let light travel at that speed not for a second, but for a full year, without stopping, without resting, every second of every day for 365 days. That distance is 1 light-year, and it is so long that writing it out in ordinary miles gives a number with 13 digits, a number no one can feel. The nearest star to the Sun, the very next campfire over from ours, is a little more than 4 light-years away. With our fastest spacecraft, the ones that take years just to cross our own solar system, reaching that nearest star would take tens of thousands of years. That is 1 star. That is 4 light-years. Now hold that, the impossible gulf to the single nearest star, and understand that it is nothing here. Our entire galaxy, the whole spilled milk band you can see on a dark night, the wheel of a few 100 billion stars that we live inside, is about 100,000 light-years across. To cross our galaxy at the speed of light, the fastest anything can go, would take 100,000 years. That is the size of our home, the bright island we belong to, and the Boötes Void is not 100,000 light-years across. It is 330 million. You could line up more than 3,000 entire galaxies like ours, edge to edge, across the width of that emptiness, and they would just barely span it. 3,000 Milky Ways, laid end to end, to cross a single empty bubble. And inside that bubble, where 3,000 galaxies could fit, there is almost nothing at all. That is the part that breaks the mind, and I want you to let it break a little, because there is something worth feeling on the other side of that failure. We can calculate the volume. We can say it holds roughly 236,000 cubic megaparsecs, a phrase that is technically a measurement and emotionally a blank wall. We can convert and reconvert and the numbers stay numb, because the human imagination was simply never built to hold a space that could swallow 3,000 galaxies and still feel empty. You're not failing to picture it because you're not trying hard enough. You're failing to picture it because no mind that ever evolved on the surface of a small warm world could picture it. The inability is not a weakness. It is an honest report from the edge of what a brain can do. And standing at that edge, knowing the number is real and measured and true while also knowing you cannot feel it, is one of the strangest experiences a person can have. You are holding a fact your imagination has refused. And then there is the second number, the one about how empty it actually is, and this one you can almost feel, which makes it land even harder. Take the average density of the universe, the ordinary spacing of galaxies out there in normal space, and ask how many galaxies a region the size of the Boötes Void ought to contain. The answer is roughly 2,000. 2,000 galaxies, each one a city of hundreds of billions of stars, is what a fair share of the universe that size should hold. Now ask how many we actually find inside the void. About 60, where 2,000 were expected. The Boötes Void contains something like 3% of the galaxies it has room for, which means that more than 19 out of every 20 galaxies that should be there are simply absent. It is not a little emptier than average. It is emptier than average by an amount that should not be possible if the universe were the smooth, generous place we once assumed. There is a particular trick the mind plays with large numbers that I want to name, because naming it helps a little. When a quantity grows past the size of anything we have ever physically encountered, the mind quietly switches strategies. Instead of picturing the thing, it just files the words. 1,000,000, 1,000,000,000, 1,000,000,000,000, 330 million light years. All of them get sorted into the same mental drawer labelled very big, and inside that drawer they all feel roughly equal, because the mind has stopped actually representing them and started merely labelling them. This is why a national budget of 1 billion and one of 1 trillion can feel similar, even though one is 1,000 times the other. The feeling of size flattens out, while the real sizes keep climbing. The only defense against this flattening is to refuse the draw, to insist on climbing the quantity rung by rung, even though it is uncomfortable and even though, in the end, the climb will fail. The failure is the point. But it has to be an honest failure, a failure you arrive at after really trying, not a shrug at the doorway. So let us try the climb once more, slowly, with a different ladder, because each angle on a number this large pries the imagination open a little further. Light, the fastest thing there is, takes a little over a second to reach us from the moon. It takes about 8 minutes to reach us from the sun. It takes a bit over 4 years to reach us from the nearest star, and around 100,000 years to cross our own galaxy. To cross from one side of the Boötes Void to the other, that same light, never slowing, never resting, would need 330 million years. 330 million years ago on Earth, there were no dinosaurs yet, no flowers, no birds. The continents were arranged into shapes you would not recognize. Life had only recently crawled onto the land. A beam of light that set out across the void back then, when the first forests were appearing on our young planet, would only now be arriving at the far side. The emptiness is so wide that light itself takes a span of time longer than the entire history of complex life on land just to cross it once. And remember what is and is not inside that crossing. For those 330 million years of travel, the light would pass almost nothing. A handful of lonely galaxies strung along that fossil seam, separated from one another by tens of millions of light years of pure dark. It is not like crossing an ocean, where at least there is water the whole way, a continuous medium beneath you. It is closer to crossing a desert so large that you might walk for a human lifetime between one grain of sand and the next, and call the grains generous company. That is the texture of the void, the actual grain of the emptiness, and it is the reason the simple word empty fails to do it justice. The void is not a room with nothing in it. It is a near-perfect absence on a scale that turns even the distances between its own rare galaxies into gulfs that dwarf everything in our familiar sky. We have the numbers. We have stood at the edge of what they can mean and felt the railing give way. Now it is time to stop measuring from outside and do the thing the discoverers could only dream of and step across that railing into the dark. Let me try one final approach to this number, because there is a version of the scale that lands in the body rather than the mind, and the body sometimes understands what the mind cannot, Forget light for a moment and think instead about the fastest things human beings have ever actually built. Our quickest spacecraft, the probes we have flung out past the planets, travel at something like a few tens of kilometers every second, which sounds enormous until you set it against these distances. At the speed of our fastest probe, crossing the gap to the nearest star would take tens of thousands of years. Crossing our own galaxy would take billions of years, far longer than the galaxy has existed. And crossing the Boötes Void, at the best speed human engineering has ever achieved, would take not thousands and not billions, but trillions of years, hundreds of times longer than the entire current age of the universe. A journey begun at the dawn of everything, at our fastest, in our best machine, would still be nowhere near finished crossing this single empty bubble today. The void is not just large compared to things, it is large compared to time itself. And here is the quietly staggering part, the part that turns the number into a feeling. All of that almost incomprehensible width, that span that defeats light and time and every machine we could build, contains almost nothing. If the void were full of galaxies, if it were a region packed with light and structure, the scale would still be overwhelming, but it would at least be a scale of somethings, a great quantity of things separated by great distances. Instead, it is a great quantity of nothing. The width is real, the depth is real, the volume is real, and the contents are very nearly absent. You're being asked to hold in your mind not an enormous amount of stuff, but an enormous amount of absence, a quantity of emptiness so large that the few dozen galaxies scattered through it serve only to measure how empty it is. That is a stranger thing to picture than any crowded immensity, and it is the true shape of the place. We have taken its measure as honestly as a mind can. Now we cross the railing and go in. So that is the scale of nothing. A bubble wide enough to hold 3,000 galaxies across, that contains 60 where 2,000 belong, sitting 700 million light-years from your back porch, in the direction of a constellation named for a herdsman who's been driving the bears around the pole since before anyone wrote anything down. We have the numbers now. We have stood at the place where they stop meaning anything, and we have not looked away. But numbers, even broken ones, are still just numbers on a page. The thing I really want to show you is not the measurement, it is the experience. So in a little while we're going to do something the discoverers could only dream of. We're going to go inside. Part 5. The 60 that remain. Before we go inside, let us spend a little time with the few things that are actually in there, because the residents of the void turn out to be just as interesting as the emptiness around them. The Boötes Void is not perfectly sterile. Those roughly 60 galaxies are real places, real cities of stars, scattered through the enormous dark like a handful of lit windows in a country with no towns. And the first surprising thing about them is not that they exist, but how they are arranged. They are not sprinkled at random through the void. A good number of them line up. They trace a rough lane, a tube, a thread of galaxies that runs through the interior of the emptiness almost like a seam. That seam is a clue, and it is one of the more elegant clues in all of cosmology. To read it, think again about soap bubbles in a sink. When two bubbles are separate, each has its own complete wall. When they drift together and merge into one larger bubble, the wall between them does not vanish all at once. For a while there is a film, a remnant of the old boundary, hanging in the middle of the new, larger space. The leading explanation for the tube of galaxies inside the Boötes Void is exactly this. The void we see today is most likely not one original emptiness, but several smaller voids that grew toward each other over cosmic time and merged into a single giant one. The thread of galaxies running through the middle is the fossil of the old walls, the leftover seam where the smaller bubbles used to meet. The emptiness, in other words, has a history written inside it. It was assembled, it has internal architecture, even the nothing was built. I find that genuinely moving, and I want to make sure you feel why. We tend to think of empty space as the absence of a story, the part of the picture where nothing happened. But the Boötes Void is not a place where nothing happened. It is a place where a great deal happened, over billions of years, and what happened was the slow construction of an emptiness, the merging of smaller darknesses into a larger one, with a faint seam left behind to mark the joins. When you look at that lonely tube of galaxies threading the void, you are looking at the scar tissue of a cosmic event, the evidence that this whole was made patiently by the same forces that made everything else. The galaxies themselves are worth a closer look too, because living in a void changes a galaxy. Out in the normal universe, galaxies are social. They live in groups and clusters, they pull on one another, they collide and merge, they strip gas from their neighbours and get stripped in turn. All of that interaction speeds up their lives and shapes what they become. But a void galaxy lives alone, with no near neighbours to disturb it, with nothing to collide with for tens of millions of light years in every direction. It evolves in solitude, on its own slow schedule. Astronomers who study void galaxies find that, on average, they tend to be bluer, more gas-laden, and still actively forming new stars, as if they are taking their time, going through their lives more slowly because nothing is rushing them. The isolation that defines the void reaches all the way down into the individual galaxies inside it, and changes how they grow. Consider what it would mean to be a star inside one of those 60 galaxies, or a world circling such a star. From the surface of a planet out there, the local sky might look almost ordinary at first. You would still have your own sun, your own scattering of nearby stars, the familiar band of your own galaxy arching overhead, because a galaxy is its own little universe of light, and you would be embedded inside it just as we are embedded in ours. The emptiness of the void does not reach inside a galaxy and hollow it out. Locally, life in a void galaxy could feel companionable, even crowded with all the stars a clear night could want. The loneliness of the void is not something you would feel by looking at your immediate surroundings. It is something you would only discover by trying to look past them, by asking what lies beyond your own galaxy's stars, and finding, when you looked, that the answer was almost nothing at all. That is a subtle and important point, and it sharpens the whole story. The isolation of the void is not a local poverty of stars, it is a poverty of neighbours. A void galaxy can be perfectly full of its own light, and still be more profoundly alone than any galaxy in a cluster, because what it lacks is not stars but company of its own kind, other galaxies near enough to see, to interact with, to learn from. We measure a galaxy's loneliness not by how dark its own nights are, but by how far it is to the next galaxy over, and by that measure the residents of the Boötes Void are among the most isolated large structures in the known universe. Each one is a brightly lit island whose nearest comparable island lies across an ocean of dark so wide that its light arrives, when it arrives at all, as the faintest possible whisper. And this is why the few galaxies the void does contain are so valuable to astronomers, almost precious. They are natural experiments in solitude. By studying how galaxies grow when they are left entirely alone, with none of the collisions and mergers and gravitational bullying that shape galaxies in crowded regions, we learn what part of a galaxy's character comes from its environment and what part comes from within. The void galaxies are the control group for the whole universe, the quiet cases against which the loud ones can be compared. That they tend to form stars steadily, holding onto their gas, evolving slowly and gently, tells us something we could learn nowhere else, that left undisturbed, a galaxy takes its time. The void does not only show us emptiness, it shows us what patience looks like on a cosmic scale. But all of this is still a view from outside, a description of a place we have only ever observed. The real understanding waits for us to do something more daring, to set ourselves down in the middle of it, and look up with our own imagined eyes. It is also worth dwelling on what the tube of galaxies tells us about time, because it turns the void from a static fact into a story with a beginning and a middle. If the seam of galaxies running through the void really is the fossil of merged walls, then it is a kind of timestamp, a record of an event in the void's past, the moment when several smaller emptinesses became one larger one. We are not looking at a thing that was simply always there in its present form. We are looking at the current frame of a process, a snapshot taken partway through an enormous and slow transformation. The smaller voids that merged were themselves the products of earlier drainage, earlier sorting, and the giant void we see today will go on changing, growing, perhaps one day merging with neighbouring voids into something larger still. The emptiness has a past and it has a future, and the lonely tube of galaxies through its middle is the visible hinge between them, the surviving evidence of where it came from. This is the kind of detail that turns a number into a place, and turning the void into a place is the whole purpose of tonight. A statistic about underdensity is forgettable, but a region with a history, with a seam where smaller darknesses joined, with a population of hermit galaxies living out slow and solitary lives, with a past and a trajectory and a future, that is somewhere you can stand, somewhere you can imagine, somewhere that can mean something to a human being. The void is not an abstraction. It is a specific location in the real universe, with specific contents arranged in a specific way for specific reasons, 700 million light-years from where you are sitting. And the most human thing we can do with such a place, the thing that no amount of measurement from the outside can give us, is to imagine being there. So let us stop describing the void as a thing on a chart and finally treat it as what it is, a place, and go and stand at the centre of it. So even the residue tells the story of loneliness. The void is empty, and the few galaxies that do live in it are themselves more isolated, more solitary, more untouched than galaxies anywhere else. They are the hermits of the cosmos, each one going about the business of making stars in a darkness so wide that its nearest neighbour is a faint smudge almost beyond seeing. And that brings us at last to the question we have been circling all along. We have stood outside this emptiness and measured it, and read its history. Now I want to stop describing it from the safety of the outside. I want to put you in the middle of it, because the truest way to understand the emptiest place in the universe is not to look at it. It is to stand inside it and look out. Part 6. Standing at the centre. So, let us go. Let us do the thing the discoverers could only imagine. Let us set you down, gently and impossibly, at the exact centre of the Boötes Void, and let us look around. You are standing on nothing, in the middle of the largest emptiness anyone has ever mapped, and the first thing you notice is the quality of the dark. It is not the dark of a night on Earth, where the sky is really a thin lid of air with light scattered through it. This is the dark of true open space, and it is total in a way no earthly night has ever been. Around you, close enough to feel like company, there is a small handful of dim stars and a little drifting gas, the immediate neighbourhood of whatever lonely galaxy you happen to be standing in. You can see those. They are near, but lift your eyes past them to where the rest of the universe ought to be, and the company ends. There is no familiar band of milk across the sky, because there is no surrounding galaxy close enough to paint one. There is no scatter of bright neighbouring galaxies, the way our sky has Andromeda as a smudge you can find with your eyes on a clear night. There is, in every direction you turn, almost nothing. The walls of the void, the filaments where the galaxies crowd, are still out there, but they are tens of millions of light-years away, so far that their light arrives thinner than the faintest thing your eyes could ever register. To stand here and look outward with human eyes is to see, very nearly, perfect blackness. Not the blackness between stars, but the blackness where there are no stars to be between. You turn, slowly, all the way around, hoping for some relief, some bright thing to fix on, and the dark just continues, smooth and complete and patient on every side, above and below, with no edge and no exception. You are not in danger. Nothing is coming. It is the stillest, safest place imaginable, and it is the loneliest view a pair of eyes has ever been given. Take a breath after that, because it is a lot to sit with. The thing I most want you to understand is that this is not a special effect, and it is not an exaggeration. That is genuinely what the sky would look like from the middle of the Boötes Void. The emptiness is so wide and the surrounding galaxies are so distant that a person standing at the centre, looking out with ordinary eyes, would see essentially nothing beyond their own immediate stellar surroundings. The rest of the universe would be there, technically, its light faintly arriving after journeys of tens of millions of years, but it would be too faint to see, drowned beneath the threshold of human vision. The full and crowded cosmos, all 2 trillion galaxies of it, would be hidden behind a curtain of distance so thick that to the naked eye it would not exist at all. What strikes people most when they really absorb this is not the fear of the dark, but the strangeness of the silence. We are used to darkness on Earth, but earthly darkness is always full of implied company. Even on the blackest night in the most remote place on our planet, you know that just over the horizon there are other lights, other people, a whole lit world waiting beyond the edge of what you can see. The dark is local and temporary, a thin curtain you could walk out from under. At the centre of the void there is no such comfort. The dark is not a curtain. It is the whole of the sky and the whole of the situation, and there is no horizon to walk past, no lit world waiting just out of view. The nearest light worth the name is tens of millions of years away at the speed of light. The silence is not a pause between sounds. It is the permanent condition of the place, and yet I keep insisting that this is not a horror, and I want to be precise about why. The void is not hostile. It is not a trap or a threat. It is simply indifferent on a scale we are not built to meet. Nothing in it wishes you harm, because nothing in it wishes anything at all. It is the purest possible encounter with the universe as it actually is when you subtract us and everything like us, the universe minding its own enormous business, neither welcoming nor rejecting, just present, just vacant, just there. People who spend time with this idea often report that the initial chill gives way to something steadier, a kind of calm that comes from meeting reality at its most honest. The void asks nothing of you and offers nothing to you. And in that complete absence of demand there is strangely a kind of peace. It is the peace of the genuinely impersonal, the relief of a place that has no opinion of you whatsoever. That calm is worth holding on to, because the next thing we have to face is heavier, and the calm is what makes it bearable. We have stood at the centre and seen the empty sky. Now we have to ask what that empty sky would do to a mind that grew up beneath it, a mind that had never known any other kind of night. Because the void does not only hide the universe from view, it hides the very fact that there is a universe to hide, and a thinking creature raised under that hidden sky would build a picture of reality with an enormous invisible hole in the centre of it, a hole shaped exactly like everything they could never see. That is where we go next, into the strange and sobering question of what such a civilization could and could not ever know. Let me add one more thing about that imagined view, because it changes how the rest of tonight will feel. When you stand at the centre of the void and see almost nothing, the nothing you see is not a flat backdrop, like a painted wall behind a stage. It has depth, real depth, the kind that should be full and is not. When you look out into that dark, you are looking across tens and hundreds of millions of light years of genuine three-dimensional space, space that in any normal part of the universe would be threaded with galaxies at every distance, near ones and far ones layered behind each other all the way out. Here, that immense volume is simply vacant, layer after layer of absence stacked behind absence. The emptiness is not a surface, it is a solid block of nothing, hundreds of millions of light years on a side, and you are floating at the centre of it, with the vacancy extending away from you equally in every direction. To take that in is to understand the void not as a dark sky, but as a dark space, an enormous room with almost nothing in it, and yourself as the single point of awareness somewhere near its middle. Now compare that to the sky you actually have. From Earth, on a dark night, you can see thousands of stars, the band of our own galaxy, a few neighbouring galaxies as faint smudges, and with a small telescope, hundreds more. The universe announces itself to us. It crowds in at the window. We did not have to work hard to discover that we were not alone, because the evidence is hanging right there overhead every clear night, free for anyone who looks. That is the gift of living on a thread of the cosmic web, near other galaxies, in one of the lit-up neighbourhoods. The void offers no such gift. The void keeps it secret. And that difference, between a sky that hands you the universe and a sky that hides it, is not just a matter of scenery. It is a matter of what a mind standing under that sky could ever come to know. Which is exactly where we are going next, because it turns out that the emptiness of the void is not only a fact about light, it is a fact about knowledge, and about how a thinking creature's entire picture of reality depends on the accident of where it happens to be standing. Part 7. The people who would believe they were alone. There is a line that astronomers like to repeat about the Boötes Void, because it captures the whole strangeness of the place in a single thought. The astronomer Greg Aldering put it roughly this way: if the Milky Way had been located in the centre of the Boötes Void, we would not have known there were other galaxies until the 1960s. Let that settle for a moment, because it is one of the most quietly staggering sentences in all of science. He is not talking about some exotic alien species. He is talking about us, about human beings, with our exact history and our exact instruments, simply relocated to the middle of the emptiness. Think about what that would have meant. In our real history, on our real Earth, we figured out that other galaxies existed in the 1920s, when Edwin Hubble measured the distance to the faint smudge we call Andromeda, and proved it was not a cloud inside our own galaxy, but an entire separate galaxy, impossibly far away. That discovery shattered the old idea that the Milky Way was the whole universe, and replaced it with the modern picture of countless galaxies stretching out in every direction. It was one of the great turning points in human thought, and it happened when it did, in part because the evidence was close enough to reach. Andromeda is 2.5 million light-years away, which is enormous, but it is near enough that we could see it, near enough that a telescope of that era could resolve it, near enough that the truth was within our grasp. Now move the whole story into the void. Put our Earth, our Sun, our galaxy at the centre of the Boötes Void and run human history forward exactly as it happened. The astronomers are just as clever. The telescopes are just as good. But now the nearest other galaxies are not 2.5 million light-years away. They are tens of millions of light-years away, out on the distant walls, far too faint for the instruments of the 1920s to detect. So Hubble looks and finds nothing beyond our own galaxy. The sky appears, to the best science of the age, to be empty beyond the Milky Way. And the reasonable conclusion, the conclusion the honest evidence supports, is that the Milky Way is everything, that our galaxy is the entire universe, that there is nothing else, anywhere, and never was. A whole civilization of careful, rational people would look at their genuinely empty sky and conclude, correctly given what they could see, that they were utterly alone, and they would go on believing it for another 40 years, until their telescopes finally grew sharp enough to pull the faint, distant truth out of the dark. This is the part of the story that I cannot stop turning over, and I want to hand it to you to turn over too. We tend to think of the truth about the universe as something fixed, something that careful people will eventually reach if they only look hard enough and think clearly enough. But the void shows us that this is not quite right. What you can know is not set only by how clever you are or how honestly you look. It is set brutally and quietly by where you happen to be standing. A civilization at the centre of the Boötes Void could do everything right, could be as brilliant and as rigorous as any people who ever lived, and could still arrive at a picture of reality that was profoundly, completely wrong, not through any failure of theirs, but because the truth was simply too far away to reach. Their loneliness would not be a feeling. It would be a fact woven into their science, an error they had no way to detect, a missing universe they had no reason to suspect. There is a temptation, when we imagine that lonely civilization, to feel a little superior to them, to think how sad that they could not see what we can see. But the honest move is the opposite one, and it is much more unsettling. The honest move is to ask what our own version of that whole might be. If a civilization at the centre of the void would have a blind spot shaped like the entire universe of galaxies and would never suspect it, then what is our blind spot shaped like? What is the thing that is true about reality right now that we cannot see and have no reason to suspect, simply because of where and when we happen to be standing? The void is not only a story about other unluckier minds. It is a warning about the structure of knowledge itself, a demonstration that a complete, careful, internally consistent picture of the universe can still be missing almost everything, and can give no sign from the inside that anything is missing at all. This is the part that should make you sit up, because we have already found at least one such hole in our own picture, and the void is the key that helps us understand it. Remember that in the far future, accelerating expansion will carry all the other galaxies out of view, leaving future astronomers with exactly the void dwellers' predicament, a sky empty of everything but their own galaxy. Those future astronomers will have no way to discover the expansion of the universe, no way to find the other galaxies, no way to learn the true history of the cosmos, because all the evidence will have been carried beyond their reach. Their picture of reality will be confident and wrong. And here is the thought that turns the knife gently. The only reason we know all of this is that we happen to live early enough, in a crowded enough sky, to still see the evidence. We are not smarter than those future minds. We are merely better positioned. The truth is available to us not because we earned it, but because we arrived in time. So the lonely civilization at the centre of the void is not a distant curiosity. It is a mirror, and what it reflects is the fragility and the luck of our own knowledge. We tend to imagine that the truth about the universe is a fixed prize that any sufficiently advanced civilization will eventually claim. The void says no. It says that some truths are only visible from some places and some times, and that a mind in the wrong place will be locked out of them forever, no matter how brilliant it is, with no way even to know what it has been locked out of. That is a humbling thing to carry, and it leads naturally to the next question, because once you accept that the void can hide an entire universe from the minds inside it, you have to ask how the universe came to build such a place at all. How do you make an emptiness that is not only enormous but actively deceptive, an emptiness that erases the evidence of everything beyond it? The answer lies in the slow and patient machinery of gravity, working over the entire age of time. There is a long history behind this idea that where you stand sets what you can know, and the void gives it perhaps its purest form. For most of human history, the limits on our knowledge of the universe were limits of instruments, things we could not see because our eyes and our tools were not good enough. Those limits we have steadily overcome, building better telescopes, reaching fainter and farther, pulling more and more of the universe into view. But the void points at a different kind of limit, one that no instrument can overcome, because it is not a limit of seeing, but a limit of what there is to see. A civilization at the center of the void could build a telescope of any size, of any sensitivity, and it would still find almost nothing beyond its own galaxy, not because its telescope was weak, but because the nearest galaxies were genuinely too far for their light to arrive in any usable amount. That is a limit you cannot engineer your way past. It is built into the geometry of the place, and this distinction between limits we can overcome and limits we cannot is one of the most important and least comfortable ideas in all of science. We are used to thinking of ignorance as temporary, as a frontier that steady effort will always eventually push back. The void insists that some ignorance is permanent, written into the structure of the universe and the position of the observer, immune to any amount of cleverness or effort. A mind in the wrong place is not merely uninformed, it is sealed off, cut away from whole regions of truth with no door and no key. And the most unsettling feature of such sealed-off ignorance is that it is invisible from the inside. The void dweller does not experience a gap in their knowledge. They experience a complete and satisfying picture of a universe that happens to be missing almost everything. Their map has no blank spaces on it, no marked uncertainties, no warning that anything is absent. It simply ends, smoothly and confidently at the edge of what they can reach, and tells them that the edge is the end of everything. To understand the void is to understand that our own map, however complete it feels, might have exactly such an invisible edge somewhere, and we would have no way of knowing, and here is the thought that makes it land hardest. We are not those people. We got lucky. We were born on a thread of the web, in a bright and crowded neighbourhood, with the evidence of cosmic abundance hanging right there in our sky for anyone to find. The fact that we know the universe is full of galaxies is not entirely to our credit. It is partly an accident of our address. Somewhere out there, in the middle of that emptiness or one like it, there may be minds looking up right now at a blank sky and concluding, reasonably and sadly and wrongly, that they are the only ones. They would have no way to know about us, and we have almost no way to reach them. The void does not just hide galaxies, it hides the truth itself from anyone unlucky enough to live inside it. So how does a universe come to build a place like that, a place that erases its own evidence? To answer that, we have to understand how you make an emptiness this large in the first place. Part 8. How you build an emptiness. It is tempting to think that a hole that big must have been carved out, that something must have happened to clear the galaxies away. But that is the wrong picture, and the right picture is stranger and gentler. Nothing emptied the Boötes Void. The galaxies that are missing from it were never there to begin with. The void was not excavated. It was, in a sense, simply never filled. To understand how, we have to go back almost to the beginning of everything, to a time when the universe was young and hot and very nearly smooth. In its first moments, the universe was filled with matter spread out almost perfectly evenly, but not quite. There were tiny differences from place to place, regions that were a little denser than average, and regions that were a little thinner, and these differences were astonishingly small, about 1 part in 100,000. We can actually see these ripples, frozen into the oldest light in the universe, the faint glow left over from the young cosmos that fills the whole sky. Those almost invisible differences, 1 part in 100,000, were the seeds of everything that would ever exist. Every galaxy, every cluster, every filament and every void grew out of that faint original unevenness. The structure of the entire universe was written, in the faintest possible draft, into that early near smoothness. Then gravity went to work, and gravity is patient and unfair. A region that started out slightly denser than average had slightly more gravity, so it pulled in a little more matter from around it, which made it denser still, which gave it more gravity, which pulled in still more. The dense grew denser. Over billions of years, these slightly dense regions grew into the walls and threads and clusters of the cosmic web, gathering matter from their surroundings like drains pulling water across a floor. But every drain has to pull that water from somewhere, and the somewhere was the regions that started out slightly thinner than average. A region that began a little underdense had a little less gravity than its surroundings, so it lost the competition. Its matter was slowly drawn out of it, toward the denser regions around it, and as it emptied it had less gravity still, and so it emptied faster. The poor got poorer. The thin regions thinned. Over the long ages of cosmic history, these underdense regions had their matter steadily pulled away into the surrounding walls, and what was left behind was a growing emptiness, a void. That is the whole mechanism, and notice how quiet it is. No explosion cleared the void, no catastrophe swept it clean. It simply started out very slightly emptier than its neighbours, lost the gravitational tug-of-war over billions of years, and gave up its matter to the brighter regions around it, one slow migration at a time, until it became the enormous near vacuum we find today. And it is still happening. The Boötes Void is not finished. Because it is underdense, the matter inside it still feels a net outward, pulled toward the denser walls, so the void is still draining, still growing, larger now than it was 1 billion years ago, and larger still 1 billion years from now. It is not a static whole. It is an emptiness that is actively becoming emptier, breathing outward, slowly and forever. Picture it sped up, the whole long history compressed into a few breaths. At the start, the region that will become the void is not empty at all. It is faintly lit, scattered with young galaxies, only a little thinner than the regions around it, nothing that would catch your eye. Then time begins to run, and you watch the matter inside it begin to migrate. Slowly, with no drama, the galaxies and the gas drift outward, toward the brightening walls that are gathering at the edges of your view. The interior dims. The lit places thin and separate and recede. Generation by generation the emptiness widens. The few remaining galaxies grow more isolated. The dark between them spreads. It is like watching a tide go out across an enormous flat shore, the water withdrawing steadily toward a distant line, leaving behind a widening expanse of bare and quiet ground. Except this tide does not come back. It goes out for 13 billion years and is going out still, and the bare ground it leaves is the Boötes Void, the great nothing, an emptiness built not by force but by the patient, unfair arithmetic of gravity drop by drop over the entire age of the universe. The strangest thing about this whole process, once you really sit with it, is how little force it required. We are used to thinking that to create something enormous you need an enormous event, an explosion, a collision, some violent cause equal to the size of the result. The void overturns that intuition completely. The largest empty structure we have ever found was made by the gentlest imaginable process. A faint initial difference of 1 part in 100,000, amplified with infinite patience over 13 billion years by nothing more dramatic than the steady, quiet pull of gravity. There was no moment of creation, no single event you could point to and say, there, that is when the void was made. There was only a slow drift, a long sorting, matter easing away from the thin places toward the thick ones, grain by grain, age by age, until a hole big enough to hold 3,000 galaxies had opened up where there had once been only a slight, almost invisible shortfall. This tells us something profound about how the universe builds things, and it is worth saying plainly. The grandest structures in existence are not the products of grand events. They are the products of tiny biases given enormous amounts of time. The cosmic web, the clusters, the filaments, the voids, all of the architecture we have been marvelling at tonight, grew from differences so small that you would need the most sensitive instruments ever built just to detect them in the early universe. Time is the real sculptor. Time takes a whisper of unevenness and, given enough of itself, turns it into the most enormous features in reality. The Boötes Void is a monument to patience, to the almost unimaginable power of a small effect that never stops and never reverses, working steadily across a span of time that makes all of human history a single-held breath by comparison. And the process is not finished, which is the detail I most want to leave with you before we move on. The void is still draining, it is still growing. Right now, tonight, as you listen, matter is still easing outward from its interior toward the brightening walls, and the emptiness is still widening, still becoming more complete. 1 billion years from now it will be larger and lonelier than it is tonight. We are not looking at a finished thing, a relic, a completed sculpture. We are looking at a process caught in the middle of its slow work, an emptiness that is actively, patiently, eternally emptying. That ongoing growth is not an accident or a leftover. It is driven by the same force that is shaping the destiny of the entire universe, the mysterious push that fills more than 2/3 of reality, and that, in the void more than anywhere else, gets to work without anything standing in its way. It is worth pausing on just how long 13 billion years really is, because the patience of this process is the thing that makes it so hard to feel and so important to grasp. We struggle to hold even a few thousand years of human history in our minds with any real vividness. 1,000,000 years is already past the edge of intuition. 13,000 million years, the age over which the void has been slowly emptying, is a span so far beyond human experience that we can only gesture at it with comparisons that themselves fail. If you compressed the entire history of the universe into a single year, all of recorded human history would occupy the last few seconds before midnight on the 31st of December, and the void would have spent essentially the whole year, every month, every week, every day, quietly draining itself emptier. The emptiness we see is not the result of a process we could ever watch. It is the result of a process so slow that a human lifetime, even the entire lifetime of our species, is far too short to see it move at all. That mismatch between the timescale of the void and the timescale of a mind is itself part of what makes the place so affecting. We are creatures of the moment, built to notice change on the scale of seasons and lifetimes, and here is a structure whose entire character is defined by changes that unfold across billions of years. The void is, in a sense, a way of seeing time itself, time at its true cosmic scale, frozen into a shape we can point at. When you look at the Boötes Void, you are looking at the accumulated result of more time than your mind can hold. The patient work of an age so long, it makes everything human seem instantaneous by comparison. And the work is not done. The same patient process that opened the void over the past 13 billion years is still opening it now, and will go on opening it for billions of years to come, driven by a force that does not tire and does not reverse, the same force that is beginning, far more gently, to reshape the destiny of our own sky. There is a quiet beauty in the fairness of the rule that built it too, even though the rule itself is merciless. Gravity did not choose the void. It did not single out that region for emptiness or punish it for anything. It simply applied the same law everywhere, without exception and without favour, and the law happened to mean that wherever matter started out slightly thin, it would grow thinner, and wherever it started out slightly thick, it would grow thicker. The void is not a victim of some special process. It is the perfectly ordinary outcome of the most ordinary law in the universe, applied with perfect consistency over an enormous span of time. Every void in the cosmic web, and every bright cluster too, was sorted by the same blind, even-handed rule, the dense places and the empty places alike just following the same arithmetic to their opposite conclusions. The emptiest place in the universe was made by the fairest possible process, and there is something clarifying in that, a reminder that the universe does not need cruelty or intention to produce loneliness on a scale beyond imagining. It only needs gravity and time and a faint head start. And the merging we talked about earlier fits right into this. As several of these growing voids expanded toward one another, their thinning walls eventually gave way, and they coalesced into the single giant void we see, leaving that fossil seam of galaxies threading the middle. So the emptiness was not only grown, it was assembled, smaller darknesses joining into a larger one, the way bubbles merge, until the result was a hole wide enough to hold 3,000 galaxies and patient enough to keep growing. There is one more thing to understand about how voids behave, though, and it connects this lonely bubble to the largest mystery in modern cosmology, the unknown force that is shaping the fate of the entire universe. Because in a void, more than anywhere else, that force gets to win. Part 9. Where the push wins. For most of the 20th century, cosmologists assumed that the expansion of the universe must be slowing down. It made sense. The universe is full of matter. Matter has gravity, and gravity pulls things together. So the outward expansion left over from the beginning should be gradually breaking, like a ball thrown upward losing speed as Earth pulls it back. The only question seemed to be whether gravity would eventually win and pull everything back together, or whether the expansion would coast outward forever, slowing but never quite stopping. Then, near the end of the century, astronomers measured the expansion carefully enough to check, and they found something that nobody had ordered. The expansion is not slowing down. It is speeding up. Something is pushing the universe apart harder and harder, overpowering gravity on the larger scales, and we do not know what it is. We call it dark energy, which is an honest name in that it admits we are mostly naming our ignorance. It makes up about 68% of everything, more than 2/3 of the entire contents of the universe, and its single known job is to push space apart at an accelerating rate. Now think about where that push has the easiest time of it. In a dense region, a cluster of galaxies bound tightly together, gravity is strong and local, and it holds things in place against the outward push. Dark energy is there too, but it is fighting uphill, and gravity locally wins. Galaxies in a cluster stay in their cluster, but in a void, there is almost no matter, and so there is almost no gravity to resist anything. The void is the one kind of place where dark energy's outward push meets almost no opposition. The emptiness lets the push run nearly uncontested. This is part of why voids grow the way they do, expanding faster than the universe as a whole, inflating like the emptiest and most obedient bubbles in the foam. A void is, in a real sense, the place where you can see the future of the universe most clearly, because it is the place where the force shaping that future faces the least resistance. That turns the emptiest places in the cosmos into something unexpected. They become laboratories. For a long time, astronomers focused their attention on the bright, crowded regions, the clusters and the galaxies, because that is where the visible action is. But the voids, it turns out, are some of the most informative regions in all of cosmology, precisely because they are so simple and so empty. With almost no matter inside them to complicate things, voids respond cleanly to dark energy and to the underlying rules of gravity, which makes their sizes and shapes and growth rates unusually sensitive tests of what those rules actually are. Cosmologists now use voids to probe the nature of dark energy, to test whether our theory of gravity is complete, even to weigh the ghostly particles called neutrinos. The emptiest places turn out to have the most to teach. The great nothing is, against all intuition, one of the universe's clearest windows onto its own deepest workings. It helps to picture the contest the way a physicist would, as a simple tug between two tendencies. On one side is gravity, the familiar inward pull, the tendency of matter to gather and clump and hold together. On the other side is the outward push of dark energy, the tendency of space itself to stretch and grow. In our everyday neighborhood, and in every dense region of the universe, gravity is winning locally. It holds our planet to our star to our galaxy to its small bound group of companions. These structures will not be torn apart by the expansion, because their own gravity is strong enough to hold the line. But the balance between the two forces depends entirely on how much matter is present in a given region, and that is what makes the void such a special arena. Where there is plenty of matter, gravity holds. Where matter is scarce, the push takes over, and nowhere is matter scarcer than at the centre of the Boötes Void. So the void is, in effect, a window onto a contest that has already been decided in the emptiness's favour. Inside it, there is so little matter that gravity has almost nothing to work with, and the outward push of dark energy meets virtually no resistance. The result is that the void expands faster than the universe around it, swelling like the most cooperative bubble in the entire cosmic foam. When cosmologists want to understand the push that is driving the fate of everything, they increasingly turn to the voids, because the voids are where that push shows itself most clearly, unobscured by the complicating tug of large amounts of matter. The emptiest places are the cleanest experiments. To read the future of the universe, you do not look at the crowded, complicated, bright regions where many forces compete. You look at the simple, empty, honest dark, where only one force is really in charge. And what that one force is doing, in the void and increasingly everywhere, is driving things apart. This is the thread that ties the lonely bubble 700 million light-years away to the destiny of our own sky. The same push that makes the Boötes Void swell is, on a longer timescale, beginning to carry the distant galaxies of our own universe away from us. For now, the effect is gentle, and the sky is still full, but it is the same effect, the same outward push, the same patient force that built the void's emptiness, and that will, given enough time, spread a version of that emptiness across the whole of creation. The void is not just a place where dark energy wins, it is a preview of what happens everywhere once dark energy wins, a small early model of the lonely universe that is slowly, inevitably coming. And that brings us to the most sobering and, I think, the most beautiful part of the entire story, the night that waits at the very end of time. There is a quiet irony in that, and it is worth pausing on. We instinctively value the full places, the bright places, the places where things are happening. We treat emptiness as the boring background, the part of the picture not worth studying, but the universe keeps insisting otherwise. The emptiness is the majority. The emptiness has a history and an architecture. And the emptiness, it now turns out, is where the universe's future is being written most legibly, where the force that will determine the fate of everything gets to act without anything in its way. To understand where all of this is going, we are not best served by looking at the crowded sky over our heads. We are best served by looking into the void, because the void is doing now, in one isolated bubble, what the entire universe is slowly going to do everywhere. And that is the thought I most need you to carry into the back half of tonight, because it is where the loneliness of the void stops being a story about a distant place and becomes a story about all of us. Part 10. The Sky at the End of Time. Here is what accelerating expansion means, followed all the way to its conclusion. Right now, in our era, the universe is still young enough and crowded enough that we can see a great deal of it. Our sky has the band of our own galaxy, our neighbouring galaxies, and beyond them, through telescopes, hundreds of billions of other galaxies stretching out toward the edge of what light has had time to reach us from. We live in a full sky and a generous age, but dark energy is pushing every distant galaxy away from us, faster and faster, and over immense stretches of time that push has a final consequence. The galaxies beyond our own little gravitationally bound group are being carried away from us so quickly, and that speed is increasing so relentlessly that one by one they are going to cross a kind of horizon, a distance beyond which their light can never again reach us. They will not blink out. They will redden and dim and slow and fade, stretched into invisibility by the expansion itself, until they are simply gone from any sky we could ever observe. The numbers on this are long but real. Over roughly the next 100 to 150 billion years, every galaxy outside our own local group, the small cluster of galaxies that our Milky Way is gravitationally bound to, will pass beyond that horizon and disappear from view. Our own local group, meanwhile, held together by its own gravity against the outward push, will slowly merge into a single enormous island of stars, and then the sky will be finished emptying. An observer living in that far future, on some world around some long-lived star in that merged island galaxy, will look out into the night and see their own galaxy's stars, and beyond them, in every direction, perfect and total darkness. No other galaxies, no evidence of expansion, no sign that the universe was ever full. The cosmos will have hidden almost all of itself, not behind a void this time, but behind time, behind the sheer relentless accumulation of accelerating distance. Step forward with me 100 billion years and stand under that future sky. You are on a world that does not exist yet, around a dim red star that will outlive our sun 100 times over. In the merged island galaxy that our local group will have become, you look up. There is your galaxy, a wheel of old stars familiar enough, and then you look past it to where the rest of the universe should be, and there is nothing. Not the near nothing of the Boötes Void, with its faint unreachable walls. Actual nothing. Smooth, complete, permanent black in every direction, all the way down. You're an astronomer of that age, and you have built the finest telescope your civilization can make, and you point it at the empty sky, and you gather light for a year, for a century, and you find not a single galaxy beyond your own, because there is not a single galaxy left to find. Everything else has crossed the horizon and gone, and so you conclude, with perfect rigour and complete sincerity, that your galaxy is the entire universe, that it has always been alone, that there is nothing else and never was. You are wrong, exactly the way a civilization at the centre of the Boötes Void would be wrong, but you have no way to know it. The future has put on the void's face, and it has put it on everywhere. It is worth being careful about what this future does and does not take away, because the precision makes it land more honestly. The stars themselves will still be there, for an extraordinarily long time. The merged island galaxy that our local group becomes will go on making and holding stars for many billions of years, and any world within it will still have a sun, still have a sky full of nearby points of light, still have everything a local night needs to feel ordinary and full. What will be gone is not the local light but the distant light, the other galaxies, the evidence of a larger universe beyond the home island. The loss is specific. It is the loss of the horizon, the loss of the beyond, the loss of any way to see that the cosmos is bigger than the one galaxy you live in. The night will still be lit. It will just have nothing in it past the edge of home, and no way to know that anything past the edge of home was ever there. And this is the precise sense in which the future wears the void's face. A civilization in that far era would stand exactly where a civilization at the centre of the Boötes Void stands today, with a sky that is locally full and cosmically empty, a sky that hides the larger universe so completely that the larger universe might as well not exist. They would do their astronomy carefully. They would map their own galaxy in loving detail. And when they turned their instruments outward, past the last of their own stars, they would find a smooth and total darkness, and they would conclude, with every appearance of good evidence, that their galaxy was alone, the whole of creation, a single island in an eternal night. The truth that there had once been countless other galaxies, now carried forever beyond reach, would be not just unknown to them, but unknowable, erased not by any failure of theirs, but by the patient arithmetic of expansion. There is a strange kind of intimacy in realizing this, a sense of being briefly in on a secret that the far future will lose. We are alive at the rare moment when the universe is still legible, when the evidence of its true size and history and origin is still hanging in our sky for anyone willing to look. That will not always be so. The window is open now and it's closing slowly, over timescales that dwarf us, but closing all the same. The Boötes Void let us see, in advance and in miniature, what the closed window will look like, what kind of sky and what kind of knowledge will remain when the long dark has finished spreading. It is not a sky to fear, exactly, but it is a sky to take seriously, because it is the one the universe is quietly working toward, and the one we have been lucky enough to be born too early to inhabit. There is a particular detail about this far future sky that I find more haunting than all the rest, and it is worth saying slowly. Those future astronomers will not be ignorant or careless. They may be far wiser than we are, with science we cannot imagine and instruments that would seem like magic to us. And they will still get the universe wrong, not through any fault of their own, but because the evidence they would need will have been carried away beyond all possible reach. They will look at their single island galaxy in its perfect dark, and they will build, carefully and rigorously, a cosmology in which that island is everything, in which there was no expansion, no beginning of the kind we know, no countless other galaxies. It will be a beautiful and self-consistent and completely sincere picture, and it will be wrong, and there will be no way for them to find out. The universe will have quietly deleted its own history, leaving its last students with a confident account that is missing nearly all of it. That is the future the void shows us in miniature, and it is why our own moment, when the evidence is still here, is so precious. Do you see what the void has been showing us all along? It was never just a strange empty bubble 700 million light-years away. It was a preview. The loneliness at the centre of the Boötes Void, the blank sky, the hidden universe, the civilization that would believe it was alone, is not a freak accident of one unlucky region. It is a small, early, local rehearsal of the condition that the entire universe is moving toward. Given enough time, every observer everywhere becomes a void dweller, every sky empties, every galaxy ends up alone with its own stars, staring out into a dark that tells it nothing. The Boötes Void is simply the place where the future arrived first, a piece of the end of cosmic history embedded in the present, waiting where we could find it and learn what is coming. We are not looking at an exception when we look into the void. We are looking at the destination. Part 11. What the void is not. Whenever a fact about the universe is this strange, the human mind reaches for explanations, and not all of them are good ones. So before we go any further into what the void means, let us clear away a few of the wilder ideas about what it is, not to mock them, because some of them are natural and even beautiful guesses, but because the truth underneath each one is more interesting than the guess. We explore these honestly on this channel, and then we let the data have the last word. The first idea is that the void must be hiding something, that it is not really empty, but full of some invisible substance, dark matter perhaps, or a kind of cosmic fog concealing the galaxies that should be there. It is an understandable thought, because we know the universe is full of dark matter, the unseen stuff that outweighs all the visible galaxies and holds them together. But the data say the opposite of hiding. The void is underdense in dark matter too, not just in the galaxies we can see. It is genuinely emptier of all matter, visible and invisible alike. There is no hidden fullness, no concealed mass. And that real emptiness is exactly what makes the void so useful, because a region with almost nothing in it is the cleanest possible place to study the forces that shape space. The void is not hiding anything. Its honesty is the whole point. The second idea is that the void is some kind of wall or boundary, the edge of the universe, or even, in the more modern version, the edge of a simulation, the place where the rendering stops. This one falls apart the moment you look at the void's surroundings. It is not an edge of anything. It has galaxies on every side of it, the walls of the cosmic web wrapping all the way around it, and it has that fossil tube of galaxies running right through its middle. It is a bubble embedded inside the foam, completely surrounded by structure, with normal universe on all sides. It is underdense, not unrendered. There is no edge here, just a quiet interior in the middle of an ordinary if enormous piece of the cosmic web. The third idea is the darkest, that something destroyed the galaxies that should be there, that some unimaginable catastrophe or some hyper-civilization swept the region clean and harvested its worlds. It makes for a dramatic story, but it requires galaxies to have existed there and then been removed, and that is not what happened. As we have seen, the void was never full. Its galaxies were not destroyed because they were never assembled. The region simply started out a little underdense and lost the slow gravitational competition over billions of years, draining its matter outward to the walls. No destroyer is needed, and the few galaxies that do live in the void are perfectly ordinary, healthy, star-forming places, with no sign of any catastrophe in their pasts. The emptiness is innocent. It was made by arithmetic, not by violence. And the related idea, borrowed from science fiction, that the void is empty because intelligent life is hiding, staying silent in a dangerous cosmos, gets the situation backwards. The void is not a place full of life keeping quiet. It is a place nearly empty of the galaxies that life would need in the first place. The silence of the void is not strategic. It is structural. The reason it matters to clear these ideas away carefully, rather than just dismissing them, is that each wrong explanation is really a misplaced version of a true and worthwhile feeling. The instinct that the void must be hiding something comes from a correct intuition that the universe is full of things we cannot see, which is true, just not here. The instinct that the void is an edge or a boundary comes from a real and ancient human question about whether the universe has limits, which is a good question, just not one the void answers. The instinct that something must have destroyed the galaxies comes from a genuine sense that such enormous emptiness ought to have a dramatic cause, which is a reasonable expectation that the universe simply does not honour. Each wrong answer is a real question pointed in the wrong direction. By gently turning each one toward the truth, we do not lose the wonder that motivated it. We relocate the wonder to where it actually belongs. And where it belongs is more remarkable than any of the guesses. The plain scientific account that a faint initial unevenness was amplified by gravity over 13 billion years into an emptiness large enough to break the imagination and old enough to preview the end of time is stranger and more beautiful than any cover-up or catastrophe could ever be. There is no hidden hand and no secret being kept. There is only the universe, following its own simple rules with infinite patience, producing as a matter of course a place so empty and so isolating that a mind at its centre would mistake it for the whole of reality. That the cosmos does this not as an exception, but as a routine consequence of its basic physics is the real marvel. The void is not a mystery in the sense of a puzzle with a hidden answer. It is a mystery in the older and finer sense, a true thing so large and so strange that simply understanding it correctly fills you with a wonder that no fantasy could match. This is the discipline that the channel tries to keep, and that I would gently offer to you as a way of meeting any strange fact about the universe. Take the wild explanations seriously enough to actually consider them, because the impulses behind them are usually pointing at something real. Then follow the evidence patiently to wherever it actually leads, and trust that the true account, when you reach it, will be worth more than the fantasy you set down to get there. With the void, that trust is rewarded completely. What we set down is a collection of cover-ups and catastrophes. What we pick up is a genuine encounter with the structure and the destiny of the universe, and with the strange position of any mind trying to understand a cosmos that mostly hides itself. So having cleared the air, let us sit finely and honestly with what we know and what we do not, because the edge between them is where the truest wonder of all of this lives. There is also a more general lesson hiding in this exercise of clearing away the wrong explanations, and it is one of the quiet gifts the void has to offer. The lesson is about how to feel wonder responsibly, how to hold on to the genuine strangeness of the universe without sliding into fantasy. It would be easy, faced with something as strange as the emptiest place in the cosmos, to reach for the most dramatic possible story, to prefer the cover-up or the catastrophe or the hidden civilization, because those stories feel exciting. But the discipline of following the evidence does not diminish the wonder. It refines it. It trades a cheap and borrowed thrill for a real and earned one. The cheap version, the harvested galaxies, the simulation edge, lasts only as long as you do not look closely. The earned version, the slow gravitational truth, grows more remarkable the closer you look, because every layer of it is real, and every real layer connects to the rest of physics, to the formation of structure, to the fate of the universe, to the position of any mind trying to understand a cosmos that mostly hides itself. And that is perhaps the strongest reason this channel keeps returning to the same practice, taking the wild ideas seriously and then grounding them. It is not about being a skeptic for its own sake, and it is certainly not about draining the magic out of the night sky. It is about the conviction that the true universe is stranger and more beautiful than anything we could invent to replace it, and that the way to feel that strangeness fully is to refuse the easy fantasies and stay with the harder, realer thing. The Boötes Void rewards that refusal completely. Set down the cover-ups and the catastrophes, and what you're left holding is not a smaller wonder but a larger one, a genuine emptiness, built by patience, large enough to defeat the imagination, lonely enough to fool any mind at its centre, and honest enough to show us in advance the shape of the universe's own distant end. No invented mystery could ever be worth as much as that true one. So with the air cleared and the fantasies gently set aside, we can turn at last to the honest unknowns, the real edges of our knowledge, where the finest wonder of all is waiting. What is left, when you clear all of that away, is something stranger and more honest than any of the guesses. The void really is almost empty. It really would make a being at its centre profoundly and measurably alone, and that loneliness really is built into the structure of the universe and into its future. There is no cover-up and no monster and no wall. There is just a real emptiness, made slowly and patiently by gravity, large enough to break the imagination and old enough to preview the end of time. The grounded truth, here as so often, turns out to be the most unsettling thing in the room, precisely because it is true. Part 12. The Honest Dark. So let us sit, finally, with what we actually know and what we honestly do not, because the edge between them is where the real wonder lives. We know the Boötes Void is there. We have measured it. We know roughly how large it is, roughly how empty, roughly how it formed, and roughly what it would be like to stand inside it. We know it is one example of the most common kind of place in the universe, and we know that the loneliness it embodies is the direction the whole cosmos is heading. Those are not guesses. They are some of the hard-won results of a century of patient looking. But around the edges of that knowledge there is a great deal we cannot yet say, and I do not want to hide it from you, because the not knowing is not a failure here. It is an invitation. We cannot yet predict from first principles exactly how large the biggest voids should be, or precisely what shapes they should take. We can model their growth, we can run the arithmetic of gravity forward in our simulations, but the larger structures still hold surprises, and the Boötes Void, when it was found, was one of those surprises, bigger than the prevailing picture allowed. We do not fully understand the dark energy that drives the voids to expand, the force that makes up more than 2/3 of the universe, and whose nature is almost entirely unknown to us. There are even hints, still uncertain, that dark energy might not be perfectly constant, that it might be changing over cosmic time, which would reshape everything we think we know about how the voids will grow and how the universe will end. And there is the question we may never be able to answer, the one that haunts the whole story. We do not know whether any life has ever arisen inside a void like this one, and if it has, we do not know whether it could ever have discovered that it was not alone, or whether it lived and died believing its single galaxy was the whole of creation, with the truth hanging forever just out of reach beyond a dark it had no way to cross. Here is the weight I want to leave you with, and I want you to feel it as wonder and not as fear, because that is what it honestly is. Emptiness is not the exception in the universe. It is the rule, and it is the destination. The crowded, generous, companionable sky you walked outside under at the start of tonight, the one that felt so full, is the rare condition. It is the early chapter. It is a gift handed to us by the simple luck of when and where we exist, late enough that the stars have formed and lit, early enough that the accelerating dark has not yet carried the other galaxies away. We live in the brief, bright, neighbour-filled window of cosmic history, the short season when the universe is full enough and young enough to be legible, when a curious creature can look up and actually learn the truth about where it lives. That window is not permanent. The great nothing at the centre of the Boötes Void is not a thing that happened to one unlucky region. It is the patient, permanent face of the universe, the condition that was here in the beginning and will be here at the end, the majority and the destination both. We are the exception. The dark is the rule, and we happen to be alive in the one fleeting age from which the whole of it can still be seen. I want to be careful here not to turn the honest unknowns into a kind of false comfort, the easy and slightly lazy idea that because we do not know everything, anything might be true. That is not what the open questions mean. We know a great deal, with real confidence, and the things we do not yet know are specific and bounded, sitting at the careful edge of a large and solid body of understanding. We know the void is there and roughly how empty it is. We know in broad terms how voids form and grow. We know that accelerating expansion is real, and that it is carrying the distant universe slowly out of reach. What we do not know are the finer details, the exact behaviour of dark energy, the precise statistics of the larger structures, the question of whether anything has ever lived inside a void and what it might have concluded. These are real gaps, but they are gaps in a wall that mostly stands, not an invitation to believe whatever we like. What the gaps do offer, though, is something better than false comfort, and that is genuine open wonder, the kind that has somewhere real to go. Every one of those unknowns is a question that future instruments and future minds may actually answer. We may yet learn whether dark energy is constant or changing, and the answer will reshape our picture of how the voids will grow and how the universe will end. We may yet refine our understanding of why the largest voids reach the sizes they do. We will probably never know whether some mind has looked up from inside a void and wondered, as we are wondering now, whether it was alone. But even that unanswerable question is a worthy thing to hold, a way of feeling kinship across an emptiness with minds we will never meet, and that may never have existed at all. The honest dark of our own ignorance is not empty. It is full of questions that still have the chance to be answered, and that is a different and finer thing than mere mystery. And so the weight I want to leave you with sits in exactly that honest place, neither false certainty nor false comfort, but real and earned wonder. The universe builds emptiness as its ordinary work, on a scale no mind can hold, and tucks inside that emptiness a preview of its own long ending. It hides itself from the minds at the centre of its voids, and it will one day hide itself from everyone when the long dark has finished spreading. We happen to be alive in the brief, bright, legible morning of the cosmos, early enough to still read the whole story in our sky. That is not a small thing to be. It is, in fact, about the luckiest thing it is possible to be, to exist at the one moment from which the truth is still visible. The void taught us that by showing us its opposite, a place and a time where the truth is gone. And to hold both at once, the lit morning and the coming dark, is to understand something about our place in the universe that no crowded sky alone could ever have told us. Sit for a moment with how unusual our position really is, in time as well as in space. We have talked all night about the luck of our address, the bright neighbourhood that lets us see the other galaxies, but there is a second piece of luck, just as large, and it is the luck of our era. We have arrived late enough that the universe has had time to build stars and galaxies and worlds and minds, late enough for there to be someone here to look, and we have arrived early enough that the accelerating dark has not yet carried the evidence away, early enough that the full history of the cosmos is still legible in our sky. Those two conditions, late enough for minds and early enough for evidence, define a window in cosmic time, and that window is not especially wide on the scale the universe runs on. Before it, there was no one to see. After it, there will be no way to know. We are alive inside the narrow overlap, the brief season when the universe contains both observers and the evidence of its own nature at the same time. That is not a small coincidence to be born into. It may be the most fortunate thing about existing at all. And notice, finally, how much of this we have learned by studying not the things but the absence of things. Almost everything tonight came from taking emptiness seriously, from treating the nothing as a subject worthy of close attention, rather than as the boring gap between the real objects. The void taught us about the structure of the cosmic web, about the patient work of gravity, about the nature of dark energy, about the fate of the universe, and about the strange dependence of knowledge on position, and it taught us all of it by being empty, by showing us what the universe looks like with almost everything subtracted. That is a lesson worth carrying beyond astronomy. The empty places, the quiet places, the places where nothing seems to be happening, are not always the background to the story. Sometimes they are the clearest part of it. Sometimes you understand the light best by giving your full attention, for once, to the dark. There is something almost unbearably tender in that, once it settles. We are not the centre of anything. We are not the point of anything. But we are, in this one specific and temporary sense, lucky beyond reckoning. We were placed on a bright thread of the web, in a crowded corner, in the legible morning of the cosmos, and so we get to know things that a being at the centre of the void could never know. Things that a being in the far future will lose the ability to know. The knowledge itself is a kind of inheritance we did nothing to earn and will not always have, and that, more than any number, is what the emptiest place in the universe finally gives us. Not fear, perspective, a sense of how rare and how passing the lit-up view really is, and how much it is worth, simply because we happen to be here now, while the lights are still on. Part 13. Back to the crowded night. So go back outside, in your mind, to where we started. Stand again under your own sky, the one that felt so full at the beginning of tonight. The thousands of stars, the spilled band of the galaxy, the faint smudges of neighbours hanging in the dark. Only now you know what you're looking at. You're not looking at the universe as it mostly is. You're looking at one of the rare bright pockets, a fleck of paint on a thread of the cosmic web, surrounded on every side and across every age by a dark majority that does not announce itself. The crowding you see is real, and it is yours, and it is also a kind of miracle of position, the view from one of the few addresses in all of creation where the universe still shows its face. And out there, 700 million light-years away, in the direction of the herdsman driving his bears around the pole, the great nothing is still there, still growing, still draining its last matter outward into the walls, still holding its 60 lonely galaxies in a darkness wide enough to swallow 3,000 more. If you could stand at its centre tonight, you would look up and see almost nothing, and you would have every reason to believe that nothing was all there was. A civilization born there would think it was alone, and would be wrong, and would have no way to know it. That was never just a fact about a distant bubble. It was a mirror held up to the future of everywhere, including here, a reminder that the empty sky is not the strange case but the eventual one, that every observer in the long run becomes a dweller in the dark. Notice, as you stand again under your familiar sky, how differently the dark between the stars reads now. Before tonight, that dark was just background, the empty stage on which the stars performed, the nothing that made the somethings visible. Now you know that the dark is not the background at all. The dark is the main thing. The stars and the galaxies are the rare exceptions stitched across an emptiness that is the true substance of the universe, the overwhelming majority of all there is, the condition that was here before the first star lit and will be here after the last one fades. The lights you love are real, and they are yours, but they are a thin and temporary embroidery on a much larger cloth, and the cloth is darkness. To see the sky this way is not to lose its beauty. It is to understand for the first time how precious and how improbable that beauty really is. And it changes, too, how you might feel about being small. The old humility of the night sky was the humility of standing inside a crowd, dwarfed by the multitude of lights. The new humility is stranger and somehow warmer. It is the humility of realizing that the crowd itself is the rare thing, that to be surrounded by light at all is a privilege most of space, and most of time does not enjoy, that the company you feel when you look up is a gift handed to you by the lucky accident of your address and your era. You're not small in an indifferent crowd. You're briefly, improbably lit, standing in one of the few warm windows in an enormous dark house at the 1 hour of the night when the lights are still on. That is not a reason to feel diminished. It is a reason to feel astonished and grateful and awake. So let the Boötes Void keep its distance and keep its secret, 700 million light-years away in the direction of the herdsman and his bears. Let it go on growing and draining and holding its 60 lonely galaxies in a dark wide enough to swallow 3,000 more. It has given us what it had to give, which was not fear but perspective, a true measure of how rare the light is and how patient the dark is, and how briefly we get to stand between them while the standing is still possible. The great nothing is the rule of the universe, and the rule is also its destination. But the exception is ours tonight, hanging overhead, free for anyone who looks. So look, gently, while you still can. Let the lit and crowded sky keep you company a little longer. And when sleep finally comes for you, carry down into it not the emptiness but the wonder and the quiet, settled gratitude of having been awake in the bright, brief morning of the world. Maybe that is the truest thing the emptiest place in the universe has to teach, and it is almost the opposite of what its reputation would suggest. The Boötes Void sounds, at first, like a lesson in insignificance, a place whose only message is how small and lonely and lost we are in an indifferent cosmos. But spend enough time with it, follow it all the way through, and the lesson quietly inverts. The void does not finally teach insignificance. It teaches preciousness. It teaches that light and company and the ability to see the truth of where you live are not the default conditions of the universe, but the rare and passing exceptions, and that we happen, by pure luck of place and time, to be holding all three at once. You cannot learn how rare your own lit sky is by staring at the light. You can only learn it by looking, as we have tonight, at the dark that the light is the exception to. So this is where I will leave you, under your own stars with the dark between them reading differently than it did when we began. The crowded sky overhead is not a permanent feature of reality, and it is not a fair sample of the universe. It is a brief and improbable gift, a warm and lit-up window in an enormous and patient dark house, open for a while at the bright morning of cosmic time. We are awake at the right hour to see it. We are early enough that the truth still hangs overhead for anyone willing to look up. That will not last forever, on the only scale the void recognizes, but it does not need to last forever to be worth everything. It only needs to be now, and it is now, and you are here for it. So look up while the looking is good, let the light keep you company, and let the great patient dark, for once, be not a thing to fear, but a measure of how lucky you are to be standing in the light at all. And then, gently, let yourself sleep. But not yet. Not for us. Not tonight. Tonight the other galaxies are still in our sky, their ancient light still arriving, the universe still crowded enough to be read. We live in the season when emptiness is not yet won, when the lit places still outnumber the dark places in our particular view, when a person can walk outside and look up and actually see that they are not alone. That season will not last forever. On the scale the void taught us to think in, it will not even last long. The dark is coming, patiently, the way it always comes, the way it built the void itself, drop by drop, over more time than the mind can hold. The great nothing is the rule, and the rule is the destination. But the exception is ours right now, hanging overhead every clear night, free for anyone who looks. So look, while the looking is good. Let the crowded sky keep you company a little longer, and when you finally close your eyes tonight, let the last thing you carry down into sleep be not the emptiness, but how rare and how bright and how briefly, beautifully full your own small corner of the universe still is.